Okay, let's make sure everything's looking good and sounding good and all that stuff. Let's just take a double check over here on the YouTube to make sure everything's okay on YouTube. Maybe it is, and maybe it isn't. Okay, that looks good. No issues there. Sounds good. Let me just share this on ye old Twitter, and then we will continue with the show and get the show on the road. So thank you all for your patience. We'll get this going in just a sec. Okay. Here we go. Here we go. I'm just going to get this going on Twitter and we're just going to get out of here. Get moving. All right, I think we are cooked. And we're good. We're going. We're cooking. We're doing it. We're doing it. We're really doing it. All right, folks. Well, good afternoon, good evening, whoever you are, wherever you are. I am Dr. Patrick Lockwood, and this is UnShrink Me. So thank you for coming out and watching and chatting and listening. This is a weekly podcast about mental health, clinical psychology, psychiatry, and the like. And the spirit of this, just so everyone knows, just so everyone's perfectly clear, that I am not here giving you professional advice. I am not here acting as your clinical psychologist, your professor. I'm not acting as a researcher. I'm not acting in my professional role in any way, shape, or form. I'm here acting as just Patrick. And the reason that I do this weekly podcast about mental health is because what I would like to try to do, in alignment with the ethics code that I am bound by from the American Psychological Association, is I would like to protect the consumers of mental health services, psychiatric services, and the like. Because it has been my experience working in the industries that I've worked in clinical psychology, private practice, been in rehabs and treatment centers and psych units and everywhere else. What I would like to do is I'd like to help protect people, educate people, and give them the best possible chance of getting everything out of their current mental health services or future mental health services that they take advantage of. So the goal of this podcast is to educate, inform, and protect the public from my people. Because my people are regular people. We are capable of flaws. We are capable of using those flaws to hurt people. We are capable of making mistakes. Obviously, iatrogenic harm is a real thing. And so this is a podcast dedicated to education and protecting consumers from the profession. Not because I hate the profession, but because I love the profession. I think that psychiatry, psychology, and the like can help people who are really struggling. So I would like for it to be as effective as possible. And so this podcast is for you. And then if you're a professional and you want to chime in as well, Phil Bradley's here saying hello. Hola, Phil. Thanks for being here. Very, very glad you're here. So good afternoon to everyone. Glad you're here. Thanks for joining me on a Saturday. And as always, this podcast is not N-O-T, not sponsored by Celsius, but I love it and it's great. So, first things first, we have a lot of topics today that are really important, and so I want to make sure I have enough time for each of them. So, there's a couple of things that I want to address off the top of this, and then after I address these kind of simpler things off the top, then there's a couple of deeper topics that I'd like to address. So, Darren McGee says, hello. Hello there. Thanks for joining so late at night. I appreciate you being here, Darren. I will talk about vicarious healing. So, there are a couple of simpler topics. I'll talk about psychiatry's harms and things like that, which is a little on the simpler side. And And then on the quasi deeper side, I'd like to talk about what is real psychotherapy, because that's a hot topic on Twitter right now. And then also, hello, Phil. And then also, is Jason Statham here? Also, I want to talk about AI and suicide, because unfortunately, I think another young person died because of suicide related to AI and using AI, ChatGPT, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. And then I would like to end with a discussion of what Darren actually asked me to talk about, which is vicarious healing. And I'll talk about the research that I found and how that's important for everyone to understand in the profession and outside of the profession. So first things first, let's talk about some simpler tweets to discuss. As you all know, or most of you know, I like to look at posts on Twitter and how they can be helpful and or not super helpful. So let's start with a more unhelpful one. And let's talk about Justin Garson. If you have listened for a few episodes, you know that I talk about Justin from time to time. So let's start with a post from Justin at JUSTIN_GARSON that was posted on October 30th. I'm going to retweet it right now just so everyone knows what I'm talking about. Okay. Just one sec. So sorry for the delay. Okay. So on October 30th, our friend Justin said, psychiatry does incalculable damage, convincing people their depression is a disorder, rather than the mind's well-designed signal that something's wrong with your life. It's not just the harms of drugs. It's also the squandered opportunities for self-discovery and growth. And as you've heard me say before, talking about Justin's tweets, I want to know the types of psychiatrists and therapists that he's met, because some of the things that he posts are extremely confusing to me. I have met lots of bad psychiatrists in my career, people who are just idiots and pill dispensers, but I've also met a number of very thoughtful, reasonable clinicians who also do good psychotherapy in the profession. And so, like, the idea, just to go back to the quote, it's also the squandered opportunities for self-discovery and growth. I'm a little confused because very few psychiatrists I have met are ignorant of the need for self-discovery and growth when you have a disorder like major depression. Excuse me. So what I would like to clarify just up front is I'd like to go kind of sentence by sentence. So first and foremost, psychiatry does incalculable damage. So this is a really interesting rhetorical tactic that I think he's going to win lots of points on in the kind of culture war battles around anti-psychiatry, pro-psychiatry, and fence sitters and all this stuff. Because on the one hand, it's absolutely true that many psychiatric medications have very real and very consistent adverse effects that do things like hurt your kidneys, hurt your liver, hurt your brain, affect your mood, put you at increased risk of a stroke, increased risk of a seizure. There's all sorts of very real adverse effects which are very consequential, and it's very true that psychiatry, the practice of dispensing medications, etc., can cause either unintentionally or willfully ignorantly these adverse effects. So he does have a factual basis for saying psychiatry can do incalculable harm. The problem is that the vast majority of people are not really experiencing pervasive harm from their psychiatric medications. And so it's a bit of a rhetorical trick to kind of like obfuscate the complicated reality of how many people are hurt by psychiatric medications, in what ways, how repairable are those harms, etc. Because adverse effects are normal, and the question becomes like, how severe are those adverse effects? How frequently do they happen? And are those permanent adverse effects? Which he never says. So that's a rhetorical tactic. Anytime you see someone post like that on Twitter, including myself, you should criticize them roundly, like I'm doing right now. Respectfully, if you can. I'm not good at that, but I try to get better. But he said, psychiatry does incalculable damage, convincing people their depression is a disorder. And so let me, dear friends, dear everybody who is listening, watching, sharing, posting, please like and retweet and post and all this stuff for me. Thank you. There are real psychiatric conditions. There are really true diagnostic issues. Just because there are issues with construct validity and reliability across all samples, etc., that doesn't mean that mental health issues aren't real. They might be more rare than the DSM makes them out to be, but they are real. I have met people with pervasively severe, hard to treat major depressive disorder that has something biological going on because they have severe vegetative symptoms of depression. These are real things that aren't helped by lifestyle change or working out at the gym. And so what I will tell everyone is if you have a diagnosis of something, there's a good chance it's a real diagnosis. Sometimes we are misdiagnosed. Sometimes we are overdiagnosed. That does happen. But being misdiagnosed or overdiagnosed doesn't mean there are zero real diagnoses on the planet. Bipolar disorder is a real force, and it's very pathological, and it hurts people. It hurts people and society because when you have pervasive mania, grandiosity, impulsivity, risky behaviors for your health like excessive drug use, speeding, whatever it is, that's dangerous for everybody, right? As an easy example. And so there are real mental disorders. Just because the categories aren't perfect and construct validity sucks and reliability is not consistent across categories, cultures, etc. There are real diagnoses, and they are life-threatening in many cases. In many cases, they are not life-threatening. In some cases, people's diagnostic issues are more mild or moderate, which means they are more easily resolvable, just not as severe, right? So there is such a thing as true major depressive disorder, especially the more severe versions of it. Now, it's easy to argue that maybe more mild versions aren't real. Hard to say. It's usually a person-by-person discussion, not like an epidemiological discussion. So mental illness is a real thing. In case it needs to be said over and over again, I can say it every week in case anyone needs to hear it. There are such a thing as real disorders. There's a real thing that's called PTSD. There's a real thing that's called bipolar disorder. There's a real thing that's called major depressive disorder, severe recurrent with psychotic features. There's a real thing called schizophrenia. There's a real thing called narcissistic personality disorder. There's a real thing that's called borderline personality disorder. All these things are real, and they're pervasive, and they're impairing. And they're not just aberrations of normal functioning. They're much more than mere aberrations of normal functioning. So Justin, I don't know who you've talked to, but everyone who has a diagnostic issue who sees a clinician should absolutely see that these are opportunities for self-discovery and growth. Because when you said that people are squandering, this is the word he used, squandering opportunities for growth, I've met very few therapists and psychiatrists who didn't think these were opportunities for growth. So I don't know who you've been talking to, Justin. I have met so few professionals in my career in 15 years. Now, it's been biased because my life has been Missouri and Midwest and South and West Coast. So maybe you're on the East Coast and it's worse there. I don't know. I'm not judging. I just don't get it. It makes no sense to me. And if anyone is watching and listening and wants to comment and tell me that you've met professionals who are like, I don't care that you're ill, this is not an opportunity for self-growth, let me know. Because every person who's in psychotherapy, everyone experiencing psychiatric treatment should absolutely be seeing this as an opportunity to grow, to take a look at who you are and evolve in some way your thought process, your understanding of your personality, your strengths and your weaknesses. So, again, I don't know who Justin talks to, but it's really freaking confusing to me. So that's kind of one of the simpler ones. I just want to give a quick shout out. Okay, quick shout out. Lori Gottlieb is a very online therapist influencer. So Lori is, I think, like an East Coast New York Times author, therapist, influencer lady. And I don't know her personally, so I have no particular fondness or dislike or whatever for her. So I see her posts and sometimes I talk about them because I think they're instructive or illustrative. So here's what she said 2 days ago. And so I want to give her a shout out because I think everyone should at least give it a read. And I think it's well phrased given the circumstance. So here's what Lori Gottlieb, and I'll spell out her handle for you. It's at LORIGOTTLIEB1. Okay. Very online. Yes, that's true. I'm very online myself. All right. So she said 2 days ago, and I quote, "We often think relational conflict is about, in bullet points, the issue, politics, parenting styles, how the dishwasher is loaded. But in couples and families, what causes pain isn't that we see the world differently. It's that we don't make room for each other's otherness," in asterisks. This week in my New York Times Ask a Therapist column, I responded to a grandmother worried about expressing her faith around her atheist daughter-in-law and new grandchild. As I write, this might seem like a difference about faith, but I think this is fundamentally an issue about the freedom to be authentic. So I haven't read her column, so I'm not giving a shout out to the column. I want to give a shout out to the basic idea. But before I do, Phil, you said very online in quotes. Do you not know what very online means, Phil? Like very online means like posts all the time and talks all the time online. Anyways, so I want to give her a shout out because in my opinion, this is just my opinion, and maybe if you're seeing a therapist or a counselor or even a coach or whatever, it's sometimes the idea that we get caught up in the content, right? This is a thing like content versus process. If you're like, I'm a clinical supervisor, right? And so as a clinical supervisor, when I'm supervising my interns, we talk about the content, what the patient said and what they did, but then we talk about the process. We talk about how they did it. We talk about mental status exam things like their tone of voice and countertransference and all these things, all these process-oriented things. And so it's very, very easy when we have an argument with a family member or a friend or whatever it is, it's very easy to get caught up in the content. And the content is like what you said or what you believe. So you're an atheist or you're a Christian or you're a Jew or a Muslim or whatever it is. And so it's like there is the content, and the content can be valid. So in one way that I disagree with Lori, it's not that the content is never an issue. It's just that usually the bigger problem is not the content. Usually the bigger problem is the process. Usually the bigger problem, as she said, is the freedom to be other, right? The freedom to be different. And I want to spend some time talking about this because I think in terms of people that have mental health problems and are in therapy or couples therapy or whatever it is, this is a huge issue that I see people struggle to handle, including some of the people I supervise, because it's not super easy, just so we're clear. It's not because they're bad at their job. It's just that it's very hard to deal with this particular problem because it's so layered. So freedom to be other is what she said in her post. And that's why I wanted to give her a shout out. And so I'd like to elaborate for just a second. And I don't know how she did in her article, so maybe go read her article. So here's what I will say about the freedom to be other, the process versus the content. And Darren actually just chimed in on the chat, and I'd like to just say what he said because I think it relates to what I'm about to say too. So Darren said, fear of rejection or disapproval is common in many different kinds of relationships. And that's 100% true because really the freedom to be other is also about risking being rejected, right? Like we are allowed, and so this is a very individualistic Western approach to this. And so you could disagree all you want if you want to disagree, if you're from a different background, but like conformity, right? Social conformity, fitting in, however you want to describe it, is completely normal. It's totally okay that you want to fit in with your friends and your family. You want to be liked by your romantic partner, your husband, your wife, your friends, your coworkers. All of that's ordinary. And there's nothing wrong with that. And it's all adaptive in many ways for most people. However, it's very much the case, especially if you're in therapy, you'll be questioning yourself about a lot of things. Who am I? What am I? I have major depression. I have PTSD as an illness. What do I do about it? Who am I for real? What's my illness and what's me? All these kinds of questions. And so it's very commonly the case, especially with family members and especially in marriages and intimate relationships, where people are terrified of being themselves. And the being terrified not only has to do with the fact that maybe their romantic partner will reject them, maybe their parents won't love them or will reject them, right? And there are sometimes many good reasons for that, because many people grow up in circumstances, for instance, where their family does reject them, right? So one common trope is that young LGBT kids are kicked out of their houses at an alarming rate compared to straight kids. That seems to be true, statistically speaking. And it's because their parents don't accept them in some meaningful way. And so that's a real thing that happens to a lot of people for dozens of reasons, not just sexuality, not just religion, right? It happens for dozens of reasons. Good reasons, bad reasons, right? A lot of kids get kicked out of their house because they're acting out behaviorally, right? They're out of control teenagers, like you'd see on like Maury Povich or something. So there's like so many reasons why people are afraid of rejection. And nowadays, with all of the online mishagas of like Twitter and all this crap, like people are afraid to be rejected online, right? They're afraid to be other. Because a lot of people want to fit in, and that's ordinary. But then there's also a variant of this around fear of rejection and disapproval that Darren talked about that has to do with your personality. Some people are very emotionally fragile because they have a personality disorder. Or some people are very rejection sensitive because of trauma, for instance, as two very simple instances. And so if you're built differently because of trauma or because of a personality difference that's substantial, it might be harder for you in some situations to be other, because other might be tragic for you, right? And so what I would like for everyone to know, especially patients, if you're in therapy and you're having a hard time being other in your marriage or in your family or in your friendships, or if you're in recovery, like I've worked in Rehabistan for most of my career. And so a lot of people in recovery are afraid to be other, sometimes for good reasons and sometimes for not good reasons. And so what I will tell everyone is that our job, one of our hardest jobs in relationships, is balancing being a part of and being separate. Because society is complicated. Relationships are complicated, and we are not designed. I want everyone to hear this loud and clear, especially patients. If you're a patient, if you're seeing a therapist or a shrink or a coach or psychiatrist, I want you to hear this loud and clear, because I want you to understand that it's complicated, right? Being other is not just as simple as being an individual and having an individual identity, individual personality style, culture, attachment style, whatever. Those are the simple categories that we talk about in therapy land, the world's worst theme park. But in reality, being other not only means being individuated in family systems theory terms, but it also means being brave. In a world where braveness, courage, or whatever is not really encouraged. Most people don't grow up in families where they encourage you to be bold and to take risks and to be seen, right? This is something that I want every patient to understand. And therapists, if you don't get this, I hope you get it at some point. Like, helping your patients be seen for who they are is extremely important. It's important from the perspective of attachment theory. It's important from the perspective of psychodynamic personality development theory, infant development therapy. Like, there's so many ways that we have confirmed that human beings, mammals, need to be seen. And all of us are built differently because there's this thing called trait exhibitionism, right? And trait sensation seeking. These are personality traits that we have researched. And what we find is that some people are on the, higher end of the spectrum in terms of more interest in being seen. They have a stronger exhibitionistic tendencies, and sometimes that's pathological. It's associated with paraphilias that are damaging to themselves and other people. And sometimes it's not pathological, right? Like, people that are often more exhibitionistic that's not pathological are like musicians and actors. They love being seen by the world. It kind of feeds their soul because they're built differently. And so being other is complicated because it's a question of not just your personality and your culture and your temperament and stuff, but it's also a question of like, what are your values? It's a question of like what matters to you. But also it's a question of how am I balancing being seen and being other with being part of? Because we need both. So if you're a super extroverted person, temperamentally, you're built that way, you're at like the 90th percentile of trait extroversion, you're going to need more social interaction to feel normal. That's how you function. Whereas if you're at the 10th percentile, you don't need a whole lot of like being in crowds and dealing with people and having fun talking to people. It's not super useful all day, every day. So you could definitely be built differently. But the fear of rejection and the fear of abandonment, as Phil's talking about right now in the chat, is a real thing. And society is very judgmental and very critical. And if you do the sick thing, which is live online all day, and I encourage you not to, if you're on Twitter all day, if you're on Instagram all day, if you're on Facebook all day or TikTok or whatever, you have very distorted views of what the real world is like. The real world is okay, especially if you live in a safer, richer, industrialized nation. So if you live in the US, the real world is okay. You're afraid of getting canceled on Twitter for whatever. But in reality, the truth is, you can go to the gym, you can go to the coffee shop, you can go to the garage, you can go to work, whatever, and not be canceled. Because you're just a regular person living regular life. And that's normal. And that should be the expectation, right? And I think it's important that people understand that the complexities, the layers, the social layers, the psychological layers, the social media layers, the personality layers, the cultural layers, the trauma layers, all these things will influence your rejection sensitivity, your fear of abandonment, and your willingness to take a risk to be other. And so it's important that you be cautious and thoughtful and respect your growth process and not just do this life coaching thing, which is like, take all the risks all the time. Like, who knows what you can actually tolerate? So sometimes you need a qualified mental health professional to figure that out, because sometimes you might be very, very sick or struggling or lost. Darren says, therapists help their clients take small, low-level risks to help build confidence and resilience. Yeah, that's the principle of exposure therapy, graduated exposure, is we take small, low-level risks, you know. Phil says, Mom always liked you best. Yeah. And so if you grew up in a home where like you were the second best child or something, that's going to have an impact on you. All these things can have an impact on you. So I hope that if you're in therapy right now, or you're in counseling or in rehab or whatever, honor the complexity of the person that you are in the world that you live in, because life is insanely complex nowadays. I talk about it in my book up there, The Fear Problem. I really hope you understand just how hard it is to live in today's world. Even though if you live in a rich country like the US, you are safer, healthier, and wealthier than you've ever been. Unless you're obese, obviously, then you're not as healthy as you could have been. But most people in Western industrialized, rich, educated countries, weird countries, are healthier, safer, wealthier, etc. than they've ever been. So it's still more complicated. And because life is more complicated, it's easier for us to get overwhelmed and afraid and be afraid of abandonment and rejection. And because of that, it's easy to retort like, well, just take a bunch of risks and it'll get better. That's like life coach advice. But the truth of the matter is, you should honor how complicated you are. And if your therapist is not helping you see the complexities of how you're built, your personality, your culture, how you grew up, the messages you internalized, all these things, then they're probably shitty. And they probably don't see who you are and how complicated you are. Now, they might be able to see, and you might have to prompt them, but you're complicated. Your circumstances are complicated. Some things about our lives are simple, right? If we're not sleeping enough, we need to do things to get better sleep. And that's pretty simple. But other things, like our expectations about ourselves and society and feeling important and feeling seen, are way more complicated. So I hope that makes sense to everyone. Because, you know, when you respect patients, I hope everyone who's a patient, a client of a therapist out there or whatever, you can hear this. When your professional respects you, they try to see who you fully are and help you see who you fully are and see all the complexities of you. Because we are complicated. We are complex. Okay? All right. So this next thing I want to talk about is on the more unfortunate side of things. And so there's an article that came out a day ago that I'm going to post right now. From a tech magazine called TechCrunch. So, brand new article came out that says 7 more families are suing OpenAI over ChatGPT's role in suicide and delusions. So apparently, according to this article, excuse me, and it's a real sad thing, so forgive me for being a little more spread out right now because it's a little distracting internally, and it's very sad. So, again, 7 families are currently suing OpenAI, which is the tech company that I think created ChatGPT, one of the more popular large language models, AI platforms, because young people have died and young people have had worsening schizophrenia symptoms, basically, it looks like. And so one particular case is about this young man named Zane Shamblin, Shamblin. Apparently this is a verified thing. Don't sue me. Basically, he had an interaction with ChatGPT where he was telling ChatGPT specifically that he had specific plans to use a gun to kill himself, and I believe that he did, based upon what I'm reading in this article. And so, again, if this is factually the case, this is tragic. And so, there are many things to say. Most of them are about me and not particularly useful. So what I believe is helpful and not unnecessarily critical or reactionary is this. There are many young people in particular, not necessarily just young people, by the way. There are also many middle-aged and older people who feel very isolated. So I'm going to say this again. There are many young people, but also middle-aged and older people, elderly people, who feel very isolated. Now, in some cases, people are very isolated. It's sometimes the case that people with a mental illness are very isolated because of stigma, because they hate themselves in some cases, because they have shame, because their friends don't understand them or their family has rejected them. There are many iterations of why some people are literally more alone. However, there's a difference between being literally alone versus feeling alone and isolated. And so some people can have lots of relationships right around them and still be miserable and self-hating and feel alone. And if you're one of those people, I hope that you find help from hopefully a qualified mental health professional who can walk you through the difference between feeling alone and being alone and why that is, what's going on with that specifically in your case. And what I will tell you is that many of these unfortunate people who've died by suicide as a result of their interactions, or in some part, I don't know how much, due to ChatGPT, etc. But if you feel extremely lonely and isolated and the thing that you trust the most is AI, or an LLM, something is wrong. If you have a large language model friend, something is wrong. If you have an AI friend, something is wrong. You may not be mentally ill, but something is wrong. And there is help, and you do not have to be alone. It may feel like you are alone. However, you do not have to be alone. There are lots of options to not be alone. There are social clubs. There are churches. There are schools. There are hobbies. There are so many activities we can do in real life to make friends and to feel not alone, to feel connected, to feel important, to feel loved, to feel worthy. And many people who are having these very online relationships, what are sometimes called parasocial relationships, feel alone. Even if they have real people in their real life who try to love them, but maybe the person can't receive it, or maybe the people trying to love them suck. Sometimes it's a combination of A and B. It's hard to say. So what I want everyone to be super clear about is that none of these people should die. None of these people should die. And the fact that this is still happening, and many of us, like Alan Francis and myself, and many others have been warning Jonathan Shedler about death by suicide and people trying to talk to ChatGPT, and ChatGPT, again, don't sue me because this is just an interpretation, enabling or encouraging or not having safeguards is a huge problem. Just so everyone out there can hear it, this is a preventable problem. This is a 100% preventable problem. I will go work for OpenAI for free to help solve this problem because this is a completely preventable problem. For instance, if the person mentions having a loaded weapon, that's a very actionable thing right there, which I believe was the case in Zane's case. So there are certain actionable things which are not super gray. Many things in life, many things in mental health are very gray. This is not. So this young man didn't need to die. I don't want anyone to die. I don't want my enemies to die. I want everyone to have the best chance possible at living the best life possible. And too many of these young people are living the worst possible lives because they have an AI friend. They have a large language model that they're using to fill a void, of a relationship void, that they either feel like they can't do in real life, it's not worth doing in real life, which is very common, by the way. There are many people, just so you know, who are starting to give up on regular people. And the sad thing is, if you pay enough attention to the worst parts of Twitter, you would walk away from the worst parts of Twitter going, of course, life isn't worth living. These people are evil and disgusting. Political Twitter, Gaza, Palestine, Israel Twitter, Ukraine, Russia Twitter, Trump Twitter, culture war Twitter in any way, shape, or form, religious Twitter. Like, there's so many corners of these social media platforms. If you just take a stroll through most parts of Reddit, it's disgusting emotionally and pro-socially. And so it's really important to be clear that it's very easy to be disheartened if you, for some reason, learn that the online world is a real approximation of real life. But the online world is not an accurate approximation of real life. And younger people, I'm especially worried about Gen Z and Gen Alpha because they are learning not only to normalize online life and make online life more important than real life, And that starts from a very early age. Some of these parents are lazy pieces of crap that let their kids play with iPads all day or whatever, and they're terrible at being a parent. And those people should feel great shame. And that's not helping. But the truth of the matter is, that's not most parents. Most parents are doing their best. Some fail, some suck, but most are trying their best. But these kids that learn from a very early age that the online world is equally important to or more important than the real world are at great risk of terrible outcomes like this. And it's very important for everyone's sake to find a collective way of acting that can help prevent these needless deaths. Zane didn't have to die, and it's very sad that he did. And I don't blame ChatGPT or OpenAI. I just think it's horrendous that the safeguards that are logical, that could be there, are not there. This article was posted yesterday. I think this kid didn't die 5 years ago. He died recently. And so what I will tell you is that if you know someone who has a relationship with a large language model, an AI model, I hope you can spend more time reaching out to them and trying to have a relationship with them because they need it badly. We are not at our healthiest when we have relationships with technology. We are at our healthiest when we have our relationships with real people. And in some cases, pets are very helpful as well. But real people, as imperfect as real people are, and we are all, I'm imperfect, everyone is imperfect. And that's okay. And part of the beauty of life is finding awesome moments despite the imperfections of each other. When you have someone you love to death, like a husband or a wife, and you go through hell and you come out the other side and you have more profound love for each other, that is the beauty of life, which you can never have with AI or ChatGPT or a large language model. And it's hard to go through hell with your family. It's hard to go through hell with your friends, with your career, with your significant other. Like, it's hard and it's easy to want to give up and just go to a simple, reliable, social figure like an AI person. But that's not good for anybody. No one is benefited by that. And so if you know someone who spends a lot of time with ChatGPT or any large language model, I hope you can reach out to them. If you're a professional, I hope you start asking your patients what their relationship with these large language models is. Because maybe they have no relationship, maybe they have some relationship, or maybe they spend a lot of time on it. And I think there's like a dose-dependent relationship. The more time they spend on it, probably the worse it is for them. So I really hope that everyone understands that most of these like serious consequences for psychiatrically vulnerable people, like this Shane kid, may he rest in peace, are preventable. They're very preventable. And I hope that if you're like this, if you're stuck with this relationship with AI, you can find real people. I hope that you reach out and find real people because real people are better. Despite our flaws and imperfections. It's okay that we're not perfect. It's a good thing, actually, because it allows us to have a richness to our relationship. And if you're vulnerable, if you're very depressed or very ashamed, or maybe even self-hating, I can understand that maybe it feels safer to have a relationship with AI because AI won't ever be intentionally mean to you or aggressive or selfish, right? Because it's a thing. And because it's a thing, it's idealizable. And many people are not. It's hard to idealize people who are imperfect. So I get it. And you deserve better. So the spirit of this is you deserve better. And I hope that everyone who can help hold these technology companies accountable to make changes to create safety guards I hope you do it. I hope you post about it. I hope you annoy the shit out of Elon Musk and Microsoft and Google and OpenAI and Sam Altman and all these people. I hope you annoy the dickens out of them so that they get that this is unacceptable. That profit and success at the expense of people's mental health is not okay, because it's not okay. Okay? So I know that's kind of a downer, but it needs to be said because many people in the profession are ignorant to this. Okay? So, bit of a downer, but yeah. All right. That was pretty heavy. Let's switch the tone a little bit. So, my colleague here, Darren McGee, and thank you, Darren, for asking about this because I think it's important. And it's important for dozens of reasons, but I'll pick just a couple of them that are easier for everyone to hear. So, Darren McGee has been asking me publicly and privately to talk about a concept called vicarious healing. And so that might not be a super intuitive concept for anyone, so I just want to make sure that I kind of break it down, and I'll talk about what research I found as well, because I think it's actually a cause for optimism, right? So vicarious healing, just so everyone's clear, the word vicarious means something that is experienced or imagined or gained, let's say, gained through a relationship with another person. So you live vicariously through somebody else by having heard stories about how their life is going. Like right now, my husband is in Las Vegas, so I've never been to Vegas. I'm living vicariously through him through the stories that he's telling me about what it's like to be there. And so vicarious trauma is a very trendy topic in psychotherapy journals and research journals, where it's like, how traumatized our therapist, how burnt out our therapist because they listen to terrible, sad, traumatic things all day. But also, on the exact opposite side of the coin, as Darren is asking me to talk about, there's this thing called vicarious healing. And I really want patients to hear this more so than even therapists, because I think patients need to understand that you being in therapy with a professional is good for the therapist too. So therapy benefits both parties. In many professions, it's a one-directional relationship. So like if you're a plumber, you have a pretty one-directional relationship. You fix a problem for the person, they give you money, but it doesn't really do much for your self-esteem or your sense of self, or it's not very existentially meaningful. It's not very relationally meaningful in many cases, in many professions. However, in medicine, in psychotherapy, in research and academics and education, it can be a very bidirectional, both directions, rewarding career. And I will be the first to say that one of the things I love the most as a supervisor is watching my supervisees grow, get better insight about their countertransfers, their boundaries, their personal needs, and how they grow through them, and get better at their job and go on and live more fulfilling lives. Like, I love that. I live through that. It's good for me mentally. Likewise with my graduate students as well. So I'll be the first to admit that vicarious healing or vicarious growth or vicarious resilience, which is a term in the literature since about 2007, I think, is a real thing, Darren. Now, there's not a lot of research, interestingly enough. Unsurprisingly, there's not much research on vicarious healing or vicarious growth or vicarious resilience, because I think what's more popular for therapists to look at and whine about are all the ways in which they signed up to get traumatized by their patients. And so let's be very, very clear, dear patients, that you are not a burden. I want you to hear this, because you are a person needing help, seeking professional services. So seeking professional services from your professional, you are paying for, or using your insurance to pay for, or whatever, you are paying for a specific professional service. So you are never a burden. Even if you're the sickest person they've ever treated, you're not a burden. Because if your therapist has shitty boundaries with you, then you're a burden. But that's on the therapist, not on you. Right? And so it's very important to be clear that you are not a burden. In fact, and what the research shows, Darren, I didn't find any papers that looked at vicarious healing, but I found a bunch of papers that looked at vicarious resilience, where through talking to patients about painful, difficult things like grief or assault or other types of trauma, that the patient and the therapist went through and experienced those painful emotions together and became more resilient together. And so, dear patients, I want you to hear that one of the coolest things that you're doing for your therapist, and you're not intentionally doing this, it's not your job to do this, just so you're clear. So, dear patients, it is not your job to do this. However, it's a cool byproduct of being in therapy, that the growth that you do in therapy, the healing that you experience in psychotherapy, can have resilience enhancing effects for the therapist. Now, this is a much, much, much longer conversation about what types of therapists experience vicarious resilience and what type of therapists don't. For instance, I would be willing to bet that the types of therapists that are more prone to experiencing vicarious resilience are more self-aware. Maybe they understand their countertransference issues or their personal unmet needs better. And maybe some therapists suck, for instance, because they don't understand their countertransference very well, and they don't understand their unmet needs very well. And so what they'll do is they'll keep talking to patients about trauma and shame and grief and things like that because the therapist has an unmet need where they want to become more resilient, but they can't see it and they can't understand it. So they play out these issues. They have enactments with their patient, is to be technical about it. But that's a 2.5 hour conversation where I explain what an enactment is and things like that. But the short story is, dear patients, dear clients, I want you to understand that in many cases, you're actually helping your therapist. You don't have to. You don't have to do anything specific. You're under zero obligation because you are the patient. Excuse me. So I hope you all understand what I'm saying, that vicarious healing or vicarious resilience, whatever it is a really cool thing. And many patients, unintentionally, it's a byproduct, will help their clinicians heal or even, become more resilient because they've gone through something difficult together. And that's one of the things that I think therapists find universally very enjoyable about their work, is that there's some psychological benefit to them. And on that thought, I want to talk about a paper I found, which I'll certainly post a link to in my caption when I'm done here today with my live broadcast. I want to talk about what we found in the research. This paper was published in one of the APA, American Psychological Journals, in 2016. So this is a qualitative paper, which means there's no numbers or anything like that. It's just interviews. And so they did a study where they looked at interview-based data from 13 therapists who worked with survivors of torture, which must be difficult, I'm sure. And they're trying to see what the relationship is between doing this kind of intensive trauma, torture, rehab work is, and vicarious resilience, where you become more resilient just by doing the work with people, not even intentionally seeking out becoming more resilient. That's why it's vicarious. So, per the abstract at least, this is what the researchers said they found. They found 4 major themes that emerged, and I quote, Number 1, change in the therapist's self-perception and their general outlook on the world, which I'll talk about. Number 2, altered spirituality. Number 3, modified thoughts about self-care. And number 4, new views on trauma work and connecting with patients. So I want to talk about each of these 4 themes just very briefly because I know it's near the end of our time here, but I'll post the paper and you should definitely read it because I think it's interesting. So let's talk about theme number 1. As a result of talking with these torture victims, these therapists found some change to their sense of self and their general outlook on the world. And so I can say at length so many stories where talking to a patient, talking to a family or a couple has changed my outlook on the world. And many times in a very good way, right? Because sometimes when you're the professional in the relationship and you hear about how someone overcame something or someone went through something very similar to you, and they had a perspective on it that you didn't fully consider or didn't take very seriously or didn't fully comprehend, etc., you might actually have a greater appreciation for a different perspective, right? And that's actually a beautiful thing. It's a lovely thing. It's one of the reasons why clinicians do the work that they do. But also this idea of changing your general outlook. Like, it's very common for every human being, especially in an industrialized society, to get kind of stuck in the rat race of life, especially for therapists. A lot of therapists live in private practice land, in therapy land, which is the world's worst theme park. And if you live in a private practice, you're just seeing patients all week and you're by yourself, you're isolated. So you don't have as much contact with the outside world. And so you don't get to see all the complexities and nuances and good and bad in the world. You just deal with these very sick people for 8 hours a day or whatever, just by yourself. No colleagues, nothing. So you're isolated. And so the beautiful thing about doing therapy with some people and overcoming big things with them is you might get a more positive outlook on the world because you see that people in the worst of circumstances are capable of changing and living a successful, fruitful, healthy life. Theme number 2, which I also am fond of, is altered spirituality. So it's not weird for many therapists to have doubts about spirituality or God or whatever, and to lack gratitude and to lack an understanding of their place in the world. And it's very common for people to understand through dealing with trauma and grief and loss and things like that, that maybe there is a greater meaning and maybe we're part of it and maybe we get to enjoy these little things, you know? And that can change your spiritual outlook as well. Modified thoughts about self-care. So, if you are a competent therapist, you should be looking at every clinical relationship you have and thinking, am I really taking the best care of myself? Is my reaction to this person evidence that I'm taking the best care of myself? It might be a problem for them. It might be projection, but it might be a me problem. And so it's awesome that you can be doing trauma work or grief work or whatever it is and learn that you have this other area of your life that you need to improve, right? You need to sleep better. Many therapists suck at sleeping. Many therapists have a bad relationship with drugs. Many therapists have a bad relationship with friends, families, romantic partners. You know, therapists have a huge divorce rate and a huge depression rate and unfortunately a huge suicide rate. And so it's very important for therapists to take the best possible care of themselves. And sometimes walking through terrible things with people as a professional will remind you need to take better care of yourselves. That's awesome. And finally, new views on the work and how to connect with people. Because when you deal with very difficult things, it forces you to reevaluate what your boundaries should be and what your boundaries actually are in the moment. So that's all awesome. And so, dear Darren, I hope that was helpful in some way, because I think it's a really important thing for all professionals to remember, but also it's very important for patients to remember. Dear patients, thank you for being in the work with us and for allowing us to experience vicarious healing, because many of us are so depressive or depressive position or whatever it is, that we forget that we need to take good care of ourselves, and we forget that we need to have the correct perspective on the world that's bigger than just people's misery in the moment, that change is possible, that cynicism is never okay. So I hope that makes sense, and I hope, Darren, that was helpful in some way, shape, or form. Okay. So it kind of looks like we're near the end of our time here. I hope this has been helpful or enlightening or challenging in some appropriate way. And I really appreciate everyone who came out to chat. A couple of you came out to chat, and I'm extremely grateful that you're here. And I hope that if you don't mind, if you could like this episode and share it on social media, or share it with your family and friends or other colleagues or whatever. I hope this is helpful in some way, shape, or form. And my general goal is to be of service to the community of clinicians, but more so the community of patients, people affected, and helped hopefully by their mental health professionals. So this is just, me trying to be of service, and I hope that we can grow it so more people can get help and get quality feedback. So that's it for today. And please like, share, and subscribe. I will try to see you next Saturday at the exact same time, around 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And as always, I like to end these podcasts with a joke. And so here is today's joke. So I once had this patient who had, I think, major depressive disorder, but it wasn't super clear because we didn't do therapy for very long. So I worked with this guy in his mid-30s, and he presented as very depressed, low self-esteem, hopelessness, a lot of pessimism, anger, irritability, no suicidal ideation, but just low mood, lack of energy. So it's like in the ballpark of clinical depression. But I only worked with him for 3 sessions. So I worked with this guy. And as we started to talk about his mood issues, his hopelessness, and he got really stuck on the concept of low self-esteem. He kept saying to me, Dr. Lockwood, I don't get why I don't like myself. Because I had decent parents and I grew up okay and I had friends, but ever since I lost my faith in God, I lost my ability to, believe that I'm valuable or worthy. And I don't get it. And so I said, is there a reason you haven't returned to religion? And he said, no, I don't see good evidence that God exists, etc., kind of like atheist talk. Fair enough, I get it, I relate. And so I said, have you considered maybe alternatives? I'm just curious. There are non-Christian or non-Abrahamic religions, and there are non-religious spiritual things that people do. And so he came back the next week and said he started studying Buddhism, which is interesting. And I'm a big fan of Buddhism. I'm kind of like a Western Buddhist, if you want to think of it. So Buddhism has the Eightfold Path and the Four Noble Truths, and the idea that attachment is suffering, and that there is no self, and all these things. And so he's just telling me what he's learning about Buddhism and how he started to feel better instantly. Because he started to realize that part of his problem, part of why he was miserable, is because he kept attaching to how things ought to be. And so it's very classically like when you first start studying Buddhism and you understand the principle of non-attachment, that it's kind of helpful. And so I said, hey, if it's working, don't fix it. If it ain't broken, don't fix it. So let's keep working on that, and feel free to keep reading and trying some coping skills and all this stuff. And came back for the 3rd session. And he was very happy. No hopelessness. He said he felt good. He had some balanced, positive affect throughout the day. Sleep was okay. Diet was okay. Exercise. Just generally he turned around, and it, just progressively was getting better from week 1 to 2 to 3. And so I asked him, to what do you attribute feeling better? And he said, it's kind of a mixture of non-attachment and no self. And I said, interesting, tell me more about this no self thing. Even though I kind of understand, I'm curious how he's internalizing it. And he was telling me that his experience of no self specifically was that because everything I think is transitory, it doesn't last, it changes from time to time. Everything I feel is transitory. It's proof, it's confirmation that there doesn't have to be a core me that matters to the world across all time, which means there's no pressure to be a certain type of way. And so I looked at him and I said, it sounds like, man, that you've got a wicked case of no self-esteem. All right, I'll see you all next week. Take very good care of yourself. Be good to yourself, especially and good to the people around you. Love yourself. Take good care.